So yeah, I'm Felix. I will talk about automation for iOS applications. So basically I'm gonna tell you how you're gonna save like a ton of time by automating like tedious tasks you do every day or every week. So I will just talk about like 3 key issues you've probably experienced in the past and how you can solve them. And I want this talk to be very, very practice oriented. So something that you can start using today. So yeah, let's get started. First off, for those of you who don't know Fastlane yet, Fastlane is an open source command line tool that helps you automate all these tasks, especially around testing and deploying your application. So Fastlane itself includes 9 separate tools that help you generate screenshots, maintaining provisioning profile, and actually deploy your app to the App Store. And Fastlane itself is a tool that connects all these other tools into one workflow, so you can easily automate the whole process. And we don't have time to cover like all these tools and all these cases, but instead we'll focus on 3 common issues and how you can solve them. First off, we will talk about generating beautiful screenshots for the App Store or for your marketing websites. Secondly, about our favorite topic, code signing and provisioning profiles. And lastly, about automating your whole deployment process. So first off, screenshots. Every time you publish a new application to the App Store, every time you change the design of your application, every time you add a new language, or Apple announces a new device, you have to generate screenshots and upload them all to iTunes Connect. So it's really hard to do screenshots right, especially just to give you an idea, if you support 10 languages with 6 different device types and 5 screenshots each, you have to generate 300 screenshots. You have to first generate them and then upload them to iTunes Connect. And yeah, you all know that this is a real pain. So that's why I developed Snapshot. And Snapshot is a tool that helps you automate the whole process. So basically it uses UI testing, which was introduced at WWDC last year, to like navigate through your application. So all you have to do is provide a UI test automation file in Swift or Objective-C and tell Snapshot how to navigate in your app and where to take the screenshots. And Snapshot will then go ahead and like iterate through all the device types and all the languages and generate the screenshots for you. And how does all this look in action? So after you have set up Snapshot already for your project, you just call Snapshot in the command line, and it will detect all the project settings and so on automatically. And then it will start compiling the application, install it on a simulator, and then interact by tapping and rotating your device, whatever you tell Snapshot to do. And it will do so for all the languages and all the device types. So this might be 300. And in the end, it will generate all these files in like a beautiful folder structure, and even generate this nice HTML-based summary where you see how your app looks on all the devices and all the languages. This is extremely useful if you want to send this to like your translation service to make sure your app looks correct like on all these screens. You don't have to manually go through all these steps. So next up, that was all about screenshots. Next up, we will talk about provisioning profile and code signing. So who of you saw this Xcode message before when you try to code sign? So we basically want to avoid this. So I want to briefly talk about code signing, about the concept of code signing for iOS and how it actually works. Basically, first off, you need a code signing identity. That's basically your certificate and your private key. And you can generate this either manually or using a tool called Cert. Next up, you need a matching provisioning profile. A provisioning profile has to be linked to your certificate so that it's valid. Otherwise, you will end up in cryptic error messages. And you can do so by using a tool called Sign. And finally, you have to compile and sign your application. So you can either do that using Xcode, or you can do that using Gem, which uses Xcode built under the hood. And once you've done all these 3 steps, you should end up in a signed IP file ready to be uploaded to a third-party beta testing service or to iTunes Connect. And looking at all this, basically you just have to enter these 3 commands in your command line, and you will be ready to code sign your application. So I recently thought about how code signing works and how we can make it easier for teams to do code signing. So what are the problems with the traditional approach of code signing and having code signing identities? So currently when you do code signing, every developer in the team has their own code signing identity. With that, for each app, you have a matching provision profile. So if you're a team of like 10 people and you have 10 apps, you end up with like over 100 provision profiles you have to maintain. And basically, you will end up with an Apple developer portal, which looks like this. A lot of expired or invalid provision profiles. You will get cryptic error messages because a coworker revoked the certificate you actually used. So there's like not a clean structure usually. And you will usually end up in like random code signing errors and waste a lot of time with that. So I was thinking about how we can offer a different approach and how to make it easier. So the concept I was coming up with is sharing one code signing identity across your team members. So assume you have one code signing identity and then one provision profile for each app identifier. This way it is very clear that you should not revoke the certificate because it is being used, and it is very clear which provision profile you use. So how can we keep it sync? Well, we're already using something that keeps stuff in sync, which is Git. Like we can use it on GitHub, Bitbucket, whatever. And to make this easy to implement, we recently launched a tool called Match. And Match implements this concept in a very easy way. So how does this look like in action? First, you have to run Match init, which will help you get up and running. You basically specify a Git repo you want to store your certificates in, and that's it for now. It will generate a match file, which is a configuration file. This configuration file stores the Git URL so that Match and Fastlane knows where to find the certificates. Next up, you run Match App Store to generate a valid App Store provision profile. So it will both generate a provision profile and a certificate, and it will make sure that these two things match. So you will never end up with mismatched certificate and provision profile. And the nice thing about this will all be stored in Git. Additionally, it is also encrypted in the Git repo, so you have two levels of security. You have Git itself with access control, and you have an encryption using OpenSSL. So when a new coworker joins, all they have to do is run Match App Store, and they can code sign. You don't have to manually transfer certificates. You don't have to create new ones. You just do that. All right. Third topic, automating your deployment. Think about the following situation. Your project manager asks for the latest beta version, the current development version on his phone to show to the clients. And you would then go ahead and do all these steps. You increment the version number or build number. You commit and push this change. And make sure you have a valid provision profile with which you can build and export the application. You upload it to some testing service, you add release notes, and then finally you can distribute it to your boss, basically. And looking at this is far too much work for what it's worth. So how can we automate all this and reduce it to a push of a button? So we can easily do that using Fastlane. And just a few words about Fastlane first. Fastlane uses a so-called fast file, and the fast file contains all information that is needed to build and deploy your application. So you define which steps to run in which order, and Fastlane will execute them one by one. If one of the steps fail, let's assume building fails, so Gym will fail, it will stop executing the deployment. So back to our example, how would it look like to actually distribute a beta build? So we define a new lane called beta. You can define as many lanes on whatever lanes you want. You then increment the version number, commit the changes, and push that back to your Git remote like GitHub. Next up, cert, sci, and gym. This is the combination we saw before. We make sure we have a valid certificate, we have a valid provision profile, and we use that to build using gym. So you can also use match instead of cert and gym if you prefer that. And finally, you can upload it to things like Crashlytics Beta or iTunes Connect with Test Flight, and then send them a notification to Slack so everybody knows your build is ready. So the great thing about this is that you can easily exchange and swap certain actions. Like if you use HipChat instead of Slack, you just write down HipChat and it will just work. And if an action is not yet available, you can easily add your own actions, your existing shell scripts, your existing Ruby scripts, and so on. So this is the whole lane that you have to define. And if you take a look at this, how does the Crashlytics action know where to find the IPA file? Or how does the Sci action know what certificate to use? So these are all things that Fastlane does for you. It will pass on information from one build step to the next one, so you end up with this very clean and easy configuration file. So once you've finished writing this, how can you actually run it? Easy enough. Fastlane beta. And to give an example of how this looks like in action, this is an actual release to iTunes Connect. This will first use Trim to build your application. And then it will go ahead and upload it using Pilot, which uses iTunes Transporter under the hood, which is built in into Xcode. All right. So this is some example output, for example, if you run Trim. And if you take a look, it is very transparent of what it is currently doing. Like it will print out what commands it is currently running, and it will always show a summary of what parameters it got. So this way, if you go back a few months in your Jenkins server, on your CI server, you would see what configuration you used back at that day. In particular, I want to talk about Spaceship. So many of these tools interact with Apple in some way. And there are, so I built Spaceship, which is basically one tool that communicates with Apple. And it abstracts out, it accesses 3 different API endpoints. The first one is iTunes Connect itself. The second one is the Apple Developer Portal. And the third one is the one that Xcode uses to sync provision profiles. So Spaceship accesses all these 3 API endpoints and provides one unified local API using a Ruby library. So this is how it looks like. This is simple Ruby code. Basically, you call spaceship.login with your email address, and you are authenticated. Your password is usually stored in the keychain, but you could also pass it here or using environment variables. Next up, we fetch the first production provisioning certificate we found, and then we also fetch information about one application. And how does this look like? There is, with Spaceship comes with the Spaceship Playground. All you have to do is run Spaceship in the command line. It will open up the Spaceship Playground, in which you can just try out commands like fetching all applications available on iTunes Connect, and you would get back the name of the application, the bundle identifier, the SKU number, and so on. So this is a great way to just play around with it, and you can build your own tools using Spaceship. It has very good documentation and test coverage. And to demonstrate what you can do with Spaceship, we also published Boarding, which is an application that runs on your own server, for example, on Heroku. And Boarding basically allows you to set up a landing page for people to register for a test flight. So currently, if someone wants to be added to your test flight group, you go to iTunes Connect and manually add them to your team. But you don't do that manually when you add someone to your newsletter, right? So this is basically the same concept. The user can just register themselves, and they click on Get Beta Access. The server would then log in using Spaceship, add the user to iTunes Connect, and they instantly get an email with the latest build. This is mostly just a demonstration of what you can do with Spaceship, and that it also runs on Linux. It doesn't require macOS. One of the recent projects I've been working on, which is not live yet, I just started it this week, is, well, I don't have a name yet. I call it Device Grid for now. Basically, when you submit a pull request on GitHub, it would go ahead and build your application and then add a comment to the pull request with a device grid. And you basically select the device type and the language. You click on it, and it will stream the app right in your browser. You don't have to manually check out the application or install it on your actual device. You would just be able to see the change right on GitHub. I will show that right after this at the demo. All right. So what we have here is basically a regular iOS project with a few classes, a few controllers, and no Fastlane yet set up. And I just want to show you of how easy it is to get started with Fastlane, because it was a lot of information like at this talk, but it's actually really easy to get started. So all you have to do is call Fastlane init, and this will ask you for your Apple ID, and you just enter the Apple ID here. So all this output here is just from the latest Xcode, which has some naming conflict with some plugins. don't worry about this. My password is already stored in the keychain. That's why I don't get asked. But usually that's the point where you would enter that. So what this actually did in the background here, it was already logging in on iTunes Connect to verify that your app with this app identifier actually exists. It found the app name from iTunes Connect, and it found the project from the current directory, and the app identifier from the project itself. So you don't have to do anything, you just say, yeah, that looks right. So once you confirm that, it will start fetching more information from iTunes Connect, as you can see here. In particular, it will download the existing metadata and screenshots, so you have them locally. And the reason for that is that once we have metadata and screenshots locally, we can actually store them in our Git repo. We usually don't want to store the screenshots there since they're very large. However, the metadata is a good thing to store in version control. You have a history, you can do pull requests on metadata, and so on. So what does this actually create in the background here? The only thing that was added is the Fastlane directory. And in that, there are a few new files and folders. In particular, I want to show you the app file. So the app file contains the most basic metadata about you and your application. In particular, the app identifier, your Apple ID, and your team identifier if you are on multiple teams. So this is useful since I can now just run one of the tools and I don't have to provide any of these values, they are just there. Next up, we have a metadata folder. Now we can even zoom in. A metadata folder. So this is the folder that contains all the App Store metadata from iTunes Connect. So you can actually read the description right here and you can add this to Git. Next up, there's a screenshots folder which contains all the screenshots. And we have fast file. And as you know, the fast file is the file that actually does the deployment. So looking at this demo, I thought it would be fun to actually build our application, sign it, and then upload it to Crashlytics beta to send it to our beta testers. So we just replaced Pilot. Pilot is the tool that does test flight uploads. We just replace it with Crashlytics. We remove these comments. And we can remove the other lanes since we don't want to use them. All right. So this is all we need. We can also get less lines by removing the documentation. That's always a good idea. So what do we have to do to actually run it? We say Fastlane beta because that's the beta lane. And this will now go ahead and use Xcode build to build our app. And uploading it to Crashlytics beta. So that was all, and we have a new build ready on Crashlytics. The second thing is basically you can now, since you have all this set up now, you can now just run any of these tools without specifying any parameters. Like I can run Gym, and it would just ask me for what scheme to run. In this case, it's example, and it just works. All right. And the second part of the demo, I wanted to show you the device grid. Again, this is something very new and will be launched probably next week. So I submitted a pull request to one of my iOS applications, and after submitting my pull request, Fastlane went ahead and built my application and then added a comment to the pull request. I can now select the device and the language, so we choose an iPhone 5S, for example, in English. And it will now go ahead, load up the simulator, install the device on the simulator, and we can now look at how the app looks like. And this is super interesting if you have a pull request, for example, that adds a new button to a UI. You don't have to actually manually clone the repo, check out the other branch, and so on. So this is the next big thing I'm working on, emoji app. And you basically can use the application here. And this is actually really fast. There's almost no delay when using that. This app is also open source, by the way, if you're interested. Cool. All right. So this was a short introduction of what you can do with Fastlane and how it will help you save a lot of time during your development, basically. And again, Fastlane supports all kinds of setups. Like if there is an action that is not available yet, you can just build your own action. There are over 170 actions like Slack, Git actions, and so on built in, like just by installing Fastlane. But again, you can use your own shell scripts if you have them already. And that was all. You can go to fastlane.tools to get more information about how to get started. Thank you. And I believe we have time for questions.
Yeah.
Yes.
How are you communicating with iTunes Connect via Fastlane?
Yeah, that was the spaceship thing I mentioned very briefly. So yeah, I can go into more detail of how it works. Basically, it is a plain HTTP client. So the first version of Fastlane, it used just a headless web browser, just an actual web browser that was click here, click here, click here. But that's super slow, unstable, and not the best way. So after I saw that many people like the tools, I actually rebuilt everything and built Spaceship. And Spaceship uses plain HTTP requests. So it's just an HTTP client. It is sending HTTPS requests to all these 3 different API endpoints and handles all different kinds of responses. Like you get JSON responses, XML responses, plist responses, zip plist responses, just HTML responses, and plain text responses. It's handling all that for you. And yeah, and it makes it very simple to build your own tools with that. And yeah, any specific questions about that?
Does iTunes connect to the API?
It does, but it's not documented. Because iTunes Connect works like this. They have an AngularJS-based front-end and web object-based back-end. So it's actually the JSON API, the iTunes Connect part. The developer part is mixed, but it's getting more and more API-like. Yeah, it's like a lot of old web servers, because iTunes Connect was initially built for artists to upload their music. And basically in the whole back-end of Apple, a developer is an artist, and an app is a song. It's just a flag that says it's actually not a song, it's an app. So that's why there's a lot of, yeah. So that's why it slowly gets better, right? But it takes time. All right. Any other questions? Sorry. Yeah.
How big is the Fastlane team today?
Yes. So yeah, up until December it was me alone, and now I'm full-time. I'm working full-time on it at Twitter.
If you have multiple provisioning profiles already on your project, which one does it pick once you set up Fastlane?
Right. So which one does it pick if you have multiple provisioning profiles on the developer portal or locally, or both?
On the developer portal.
Right. So it would choose the first one that matches the app identifier and the certificate. And if you don't specify the certificate, we just pick the first one. However, Sai also makes sure that only download provisioning profiles it has the certificate for. This is a very important point. Let's assume you don't have any certificates locally. It will find a provisioning profile on the developer portal. It will download it, but you will not be able to use it. So Sai will make sure that you actually have it. This way you catch the error earlier. Because when you get the error while actually code signing, it's very cryptic. So yeah, and what I really recommend is just using match if the company's policy allowed. Some companies are oh, we don't want to store anything in Git, which I understand, but I would recommend just using match. It is so useful. You get a new Mac and you just run match App Store and everything's working. You don't need to deal with code signing anymore. And one more thing is that match and Sai, they also pre-fill environment variables for the provisioning profile. So what it means is the UUID of the provisioning profile, which is the unique identifier, will be passed using an environment variable to Xcode, so that it will be inserted on your Xcode project at the right point without you having to define a static provision profile. So this way, this will always work even after 1 year when your certificate expires. Match will detect that, just generate new ones, replace the old ones, and pass the new environment variables in there. Yeah, it does a lot of things for you. Again, if you want more control over that, you can use like Seat and Sci, which is just a basic thing. And if you want even more control, you can build your own thing using Spaceship or do it manually. Okay.
Does Fastlane take care of push notification certificate, and also does it take care of all the certificate necessary for Apple Watch apps? Because I know it's a pain in the ass to do it.
What is the Apple Watch part? What's the question? Sorry.
You need to set up like a crazy amount of certificates.
Right. Let me just go back a few slides for that. So I wasn't describing every single one of these tools, but there is this one tool called PAM, which does push notification profiles. So in case you had ever set a push notification profile, it takes about 5 minutes of Googling because you don't remember how it works. And then you just copy paste random commands from the internet and run it on your terminal. And that's why I built PAM, and with PAM it takes 1 second to actually generate that. And all you have to do is run PAM. And that's it, because in the app file, which you already have when you set up Fastlane, it has all information, like the app identifier and your Apple ID, right? So push notifications are covered, and if you use PAM in combination with Fastlane, you can instantly upload it to your push notification provider. So you get a success block, which is called every time there's a new certificate. PAM again will make sure to detect if your existing push notification profile is about to expire. It will then warn you and generate a new one for you. Just very briefly about the other tools I haven't mentioned yet. Frameit is a tool that generates, like adds device frames around your screenshots. So it basically, you know, these fancy screenshots in the App Store where you have like a background blur and like a title above it. You can do that with Frameit in an automated way, which means you can do it for hundreds of screenshots. And I wrote a very detailed blog post about how to use that and why it is better than many of the other services out there. You can Google about how to create perfect iOS screenshots and you will find my blog post, or just look on my blog for that. And Scan is a tool for running tests. All you have to do is run Scan and it will run your tests. That's it. And Produce is a tool, like if you are an app agency or a company that has a lot of apps, Produce allows you to generate new app IDs on the developer portal and iTunes Connect from the command line. So basically, with these tools, you can do everything from creating your first certificate, your first push notification certificate, your first app ID, to your screenshots, to building your app, assigning your app, to deploying it to the App Store, to submitting it for review. Every single step is covered by these tools. Yeah. All right. Any more questions? No.
Last question.
Yeah.
So how do you like Swift? And then do you see Swift as, so this is web framework or Meteor.js, or Ruby on Rails is full stack web framework?
Right.
Do you see Swift to become something like Ruby on Rails or
Okay, to your first question, I have used Swift, but I haven't used it a lot. Like all these tools are based on Ruby. They're developed in Ruby because tools like CocoaPods and Nomad tools were developed in Ruby. And back when I started building Fastlane, Swift was just announced, and it was a good choice not to use it from day one for like this. So I can't say a lot about how I like Swift. I think it's a cool language. I would love to learn more, but I don't use it a lot currently. Second question is with Rails. Like, this is based on Ruby, but I don't use any Rails. Like, Rails is the web framework around Ruby, and it is built in Ruby. And it uses an external HTTP server to actually render pages. So I can definitely see Swift becoming something like the Ruby part of Rails, and then people build something like Rails on top. Yes, absolutely. But you have to be very careful with difference between Ruby on Rails and Ruby, which is same with Swift. So a lot of people already did build web frameworks on top of Swift, with Swift. Yeah, I can definitely see that. Yeah.
So would you see Fastlane be built in Swift in a couple years or something?
I don't know if it's worth rewriting everything. It seems like a lot of work.
Library,
Maybe. It would be hard to interact between these two, however. So up until now, it was also a thing that Fastlane also works for Android. I didn't mention it today because you're probably not so much interested, but it has some Android tools as well and Android support as well, which means it has to run on Linux as well and Windows. We're currently working on Windows support. It's not yet there, which makes everything, like doing that in Swift is a little harder currently. But it will take a while, right? In 1 or 2 years, it will all be ready. But yeah, from today's perspective, obviously, I would prefer to say that Fastlane is built in Swift, since it's easier for iOS developer to contribute to Fastlane. In general, this is like very active on GitHub. Like like most of the integrations all came from external contributors, like people who just used Fastlane and thought, oh my god, I need this action, I need this functionality. Like it's very community driven.